He took everything from me, and I was too broken to stop him." The words tore out of Cassandra Bennett before she could stop them, her voice fracturing like thin ice under weight. The shelter office smelled of industrial bleach and something else, desperation, maybe, or the ghost of 1,000 broken people who had sat in this exact chair. Frost crept through the cracked window frame at 2:47 in the morning, and outside, stars hung sharp as diamonds in a sky so clear it looked like the world was holding its breath. Her orthopedic shoe squeaked against linoleum as she stood, the sound swallowed immediately by the silence that followed her words. She wore her diner apron still, coffee stains mapping the last 12 hours across the faded blue fabric like a record of her exhaustion. Behind her, small fingers gripped the hem of her uniform. Ava. 5 years old with dark eyes that had seen too much, pressing against Cassandra's legs as if she could disappear into the fabric. The man in the doorway did not move. Anthony Marchetti never moved when he held power over someone. He stood perfectly still, letting his presence do the work, his shoulders broad and thick with the kind of weight that came from taking things from people smaller than himself. His suit was cheap polyester, the color of old bruises, and his hand held papers that looked like they weighed 1,000 pounds. The eviction notice. $300,000 in 7 days, or she lost the apartment on Ashland Street that she had been paying rent on for 3 years while he owned the building beneath it like a king owning a kingdom. Too broken, he repeated, and something in his voice turned the word into a weapon. That is why this works so well, Cassandra. Broken people do not fight back. She did not respond. Ava's fingers tightened. What Cassandra did not know, what she could not have known in that moment, was that standing in the parking lot 40 feet away, separated from this office by 2 walls and a sheet of reinforced glass, stood a man named Rafael Caruso. He watched through the window with eyes the color of a storm about to break. He had been searching for the child pressing against that waitress for 18 days. 18 days of dead ends and shadows and the particular kind of desperation that only comes when something precious disappears. His men stood beside him in a row, 6 of them in black coats that cost more than most people's cars, and not a single one of them understood why their boss had driven to this shelter in the middle of the night. They did not know yet. They would find out in the next 72 hours why the missing person he sought was worth turning the entire city inside out. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning. 3 hours earlier. $73 in crumpled bills lay at the edge of the diner sink. Cassandra counted them again even though she had already counted them twice. $73. The number did not change no matter how many times her trembling fingers sorted through the worn paper. 3 weeks of tips. 3 weeks of double shifts. 3 weeks of standing on her feet until the arches screamed and her lower back seemed to have forgotten what it meant to be straight. The fluorescent lights of Riley's diner hummed above her, a sound so constant she only heard it when the diner was quiet like this, only heard it when she was alone with the money that was not enough. She stuffed the bills into her apron pocket along with a $20 bill she had hidden last month, bringing her total to $93. $93 to last until next Thursday. The rent was due on the 15th. It was the 8th. She had done this calculation so many times her hands did it automatically now, her brain simply a machine running the same broken equation over and over. $93 minus electricity. Minus food. Minus bus fare. The numbers never added up. They had stopped adding up 8 years ago. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened window above the sink. She barely recognized the woman looking out. 32 years old but looking at least 45, with dark circles carved so deeply beneath her eyes they looked like bruises. Her hair had gone mostly gray at the temples, premature, the one doctor she could afford had said, as if the grief and fear and relentless exhaustion were aging her from the inside out. A scar ran along her collarbone, just visible above the diner uniform neckline, thin and white and telling a story she had never spoken aloud to a single human being. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and the ghost of 1,000 meals. The black and white checkered floor stretched out behind her, empty now except for the manager counting the register in the back office. Rain began to fall outside, the first drops hitting the window with soft percussion, and Cassandra watched the streaks blur the streetlights into watercolor paintings of orange and red. She had 45 minutes before her shift at the shelter began. 45 minutes to sit here in the break room before she had to go back out into the night and do it all again in a different building with different fluorescent lights. The door to the kitchen opened and Marcus, the head cook, emerged carrying a container of leftover soup. He was 63 years old and had worked at Riley's for 19 years, and he looked at Cassandra with an expression she had seen many times before, the look of someone who knew exactly how many dollars were in her pocket without having to ask. "Potato and leek today," he said, setting the container on the counter beside her. "It was going to be thrown out anyway. My sister made it, good stuff. You take it." She reached for the container, but something in her throat tightened. "Marcus, I cannot keep." "You keep it, or I throw it in the garbage," he said, and turned away before she could argue further. "That is the choice." She held the container against her chest and felt something break inside her ribs. Not a dramatic breaking, not the kind that made headlines. Just the small, quiet breaking that happened when someone was kind to you and you remembered that not everyone had decided to hurt you. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the window like a heartbeat. She had 3 miles to travel to reach the Ashford Street Community Shelter, and the bus came at 3:15. That gave her 2 minutes to spare, which meant if she ran she could make it, and if she did not run she would be late, and if she was late there would be consequences because Anthony Marchetti did not tolerate lateness, and Marchetti owned not only the building where she lived but also did not own the shelter but had friends who did, and his reach was longer than she had ever fully understood. She grabbed her coat, thin, synthetic, fraying at the cuffs, and moved toward the door. "Hey, Cassandra!" Marcus called from the kitchen. She turned. He stood in the doorway, his dark eyes soft with something she could not quite name. "You are stronger than you know. Do not forget that." She nodded, unable to speak, and pushed out into the rain. The shelter sat on 14th Street in a converted warehouse that used to be a textile factory before the factories moved overseas and left the buildings empty like tombstones. Inside, fluorescent lights cast everything in a sickly white-blue glow. The smell was different here, not food and coffee, but disinfectant, an old carpet and the faint sourness of too many people living in too few rooms. Her job was administrative, filing, data entry, scheduling the rotating volunteers who came on weekends and holidays. It was $8 an hour and 75 cents more than minimum wage because she had been here 5 years, and the director, an older woman named Patricia, had given her a raise once that amounted to almost nothing and yet meant everything. The office was in the back of the building, a small room with one window that faced the parking lot. Cassandra sat at her desk and began the work that would consume the next 8 hours. File intake forms. Update spreadsheets. Schedule the kitchen volunteers. The tasks were mindless and repetitive, which meant she could do them while thinking about other things, which meant she could think about the fact that she was going to be evicted in 9 days, that she had nowhere to go, that the small apartment on Ashland Street was all she had left in the world besides the clothes on her back and Marcus's potato and leek soup. At 2 in the morning, movement at her office door made her look up. A child stood in the doorway. Very small. Very thin. Wearing a coat 3 sizes too large with a sleeve torn and hanging. Her dark hair was matted on one side where she had been sleeping, and her eyes, dark brown, enormous, held a stillness that should not exist in a 5-year-old's face. "I am hungry," the child said. Cassandra stood immediately. Come with me." The shelter kitchen was locked after midnight. She knew where the spare key was kept. She led the small girl, who told her name was Ava and nothing else, to the industrial kitchen and opened the refrigerator. The shelves were mostly empty. She found a sandwich wrapped in plastic from a volunteer's donation earlier that day. Peanut butter and jelly. She unwrapped it and set it on a plate. The child held the sandwich in both hands and looked at it as if she was not sure whether it was real. "Eat," Cassandra said softly. "It is safe." Ava brought the sandwich to her mouth, and something in the gesture, the careful, tentative way she moved, made Cassandra understand that this child had learned not to trust food, not to trust hands, not to trust the world. She pulled a chair close and sat watching the girl eat. Outside the kitchen window, rain continued to fall. Inside, there was only the soft sound of a child eating and the hum of the refrigerator and the profound peace that comes from doing the one thing that actually matters. When Ava finished, the child turned to Cassandra and said, "You have a sad face. I also have a sad face." And in that moment, at 3:22 in the morning in a shelter kitchen that smelled like bleach and rain, Cassandra Bennett held out her hand. The child took it. Neither of them could have known that across the city, on the top floor of a building that overlooked the harbor, a man named Rafael Caruso was making a phone call that would begin to unravel everything. $73. That was everything. Cassandra Bennett counted the crumpled bills for the third time, spreading them across the stainless steel sink at Mike's diner, her fingers trembling slightly as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead like angry wasps. The bills were damp from sweat and spilled coffee. Some were folded. Some were torn at the corners. One had a lipstick stain that would not come out. $73 for 9 hours on her feet. 9 hours of smiling at men who did not see her. 9 hours of pouring coffee into cups held by hands that had never known the weight of real struggle. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and old grease. The walls were yellow once, maybe decades ago. Now they were the color of nicotine and resignation. Water stains bloomed across the ceiling like a map of slow collapse. Behind the counter, the clock read 3:22 in the morning. The black and white checkered floor stretched before her, and her orthopedic shoes had left wet prints all across it, a trail marking exactly where she had stood, where she had waited, where she had endured. "You heading out?" Carl, her manager, stood in the kitchen doorway. He was a large man with a neck that seemed to exist only to hold his head at an angle of permanent disapproval. He held a clipboard. On it was the schedule for next week. Cassandra nodded. She was already pulling off her apron. The apron was white once. Now it was a Jackson Pollock of coffee stains and something that might have been marinara sauce from the lunch shift, though she could not remember serving marinara today. She could not remember much anymore. Her brain had started to feel like a hard drive with too many files open, everything running slowly, nothing loading. "Double shift tomorrow," Carl said, and it was not a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered the way a prison warden might announce the execution date. 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. "We have the church group coming in for breakfast, and lunch will be slammed." Cassandra folded the apron and placed it on the counter. "Yes," she said. "I will be here." She was always here. That was the problem. She was always here and never anywhere else, caught in a loop that felt like drowning in slow motion, the water rising so gradually that she had not noticed until it reached her throat. The money, the $73, she placed into the pocket of her coat. The coat was brown and several sizes too large. She had found it in a donation bin 3 years ago. It had a button missing and a seam coming loose along the right shoulder, but it was warm, and warmth was the only luxury she could afford. Outside, San Francisco at 3:33 in the morning was a city of rain and neon. The streets were slick with moisture, and the few streetlights that were working cast red and blue reflections across the wet asphalt like spilled paint. Her breath fogged in the cold air. She could see it disappearing. She could see herself disappearing the same way, vapor rising, nothing permanent, nothing that would leave a mark. The walk to the shelter took 18 minutes. She had timed it once, weeks ago, when she was still counting small things. Now she just walked, her body moving on autopilot while her mind spiraled through numbers that would never add up to anything good. Rent was $4,000 a month. She made roughly $2,000 through the diner, if tips were decent, and she worked double 6 days a week. That left a gap of $2,000 that she covered by cleaning houses on Sundays, earning $40 per house if the homeowner paid cash, which some did out of pity and some out of calculation. Cash meant no records, no taxes, no official existence. But it was not the rent that was killing her. 3 months ago, she had learned that Anthony Marchetti, the man who owned the building where she rented a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor, had decided to sell. The building was going to be demolished and replaced with luxury condominiums. Market rate for her unit, he had informed her, was approximately $300,000. She had 3 days to pay, and then she would be evicted. That was the conversation. There was no negotiation. There was no conversation at all, really. He had simply appeared in the hallway outside her apartment door, a man in an expensive suit with a kind of face that suggested he had hurt people and would hurt more before the week was out, and informed her of this as though reading a weather report. $300,000, she had repeated, certain she had misheard. 7 days, he had said. Then you are out on the street. Unless you want to pay it. Do you want to pay it? She had not answered. The question did not require an answer. Now she was 5 days away from the deadline, and she had $200 in a savings account that she could not touch because that money was for Ava's school supplies next year, assuming Ava was still alive next year, assuming Cassandra was still alive, assuming any of this mattered at all. The shelter occupied a narrow building on Mission Street, sandwiched between a closed laundromat and a store that sold nothing but energy drinks and lottery tickets. The paint was peeling in long strips, and someone had written something in spray paint across the door, but the letters had faded so much that it was impossible to tell whether it was a prayer or a curse. Either way, she thought, it probably applied. She used her key to unlock the back entrance. The shelter's night coordinator was asleep in the office, a woman named Maria who had given up on staying awake around midnight and had simply surrendered to exhaustion. Cassandra did not wake her. She moved quietly through the hallways, past the sleeping cots where men and women lay in various states of stillness, some snoring, some sobbing quietly into thin pillows, some simply staring at the ceiling as though searching for answers in the water stains above. The kitchen was locked. The rules were clear: volunteers could not access the kitchen after midnight. But Cassandra had been volunteering here for 3 years, and she knew where the spare key was kept, tucked behind the loose brick in the wall near the supply closet, a secret she had never shared and never would. She found it in the darkness, her fingers knowing exactly where to search. The key was cold and slightly rough with rust. The kitchen door opened with the smallest sound of metal against metal. She stepped inside. The smell hit her immediately: bleach and old onions and something underneath that might have been hope or might have been desperation. It was hard to tell the difference. That was when she saw her. The girl was sitting at the metal prep table in the darkness, no more than 5 years old, with tangled dark hair that suggested she had not been brushed in weeks and a dress that was too thin for this season, maybe any season. The girl's small hand held a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly, wrapped in plastic that had been peeled back carefully, and her enormous dark eyes watched Cassandra with the kind of stillness that should not exist in a child's face. Real terror looked like that. Not loud. Not frantic. Just still. Frozen. The stillness of something small waiting to see whether it would be killed. "I am hungry," the child said. Her voice was barely a whisper, just air shaped into words. "I did not mean to take it. I was hungry." Cassandra felt something shift in her chest, some plate moving under the earth of her own breaking heart. She knelt slowly, lowering herself to the child's eye level. She moved deliberately, every gesture careful and unthreatening, the way one might approach a wounded animal. "What is your name?" Cassandra asked. "Ava," the girl said. Then, after a pause so long it seemed to contain an entire universe of fear, "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." Cassandra said it simply, the way you might state a fact about weather. "I am not going to hurt you. You can have the sandwich. It is yours now. You can have more if you are still hungry." She stood slowly and moved to the refrigerator. The industrial refrigerator at the shelter was mostly empty most nights, donations came sporadically, and what came was often near expiration. But there was a container of milk from yesterday, and there were several apples in the crisper drawer, and there was another sandwich from the afternoon's donations. She made a small meal on a plate, the original sandwich, the second sandwich, one apple cut into pieces, a glass of milk poured carefully so it would not spill. When she set it down in front of Ava, the child looked at it the way a person in a desert might look at water. With disbelief. with the certainty that it was a mirage. "Eat," Cassandra said softly. "It is safe." Ava brought the first sandwich to her mouth and bit into it with the tentative care of someone who had learned not to trust food, not to trust hands, not to trust the world. Cassandra pulled a chair close and sat watching. Outside the kitchen window, rain continued to fall, pattering against the glass with the rhythm of something that had no ending. Inside, there was only the soft sound of a child eating and the hum of the refrigerator and the profound silence that comes when one small person decides to show kindness to another. When Ava finished both sandwiches, all the apple pieces, half the milk, the child set down the empty glass and turned to Cassandra. "You have a sad face," Ava said. It was stated as simple fact. "I also have a sad face." "We have the same face." Cassandra felt something break open inside her ribs, something she had sealed shut years ago. She reached out her hand. Ava took it. Neither of them could have known that across the city, on the 40th floor of a glass building overlooking the harbor, a man named Rafael Caruso was standing at a floor-to-ceiling window, holding a phone to his ear, about to offer $1 million to anyone who could tell him where his daughter was. The frost clung to the car windows like lace, each crystal catching the streetlight in 1,000 tiny fires. The night was so cold that breath turned to ghosts the moment it left the body. San Francisco's December wind cut through the empty streets with the kind of cruelty that belonged only to winter, and at 1:33 in the morning, the city had surrendered entirely to silence. Rafael Caruso stepped out of the black SUV like a man descending from something higher than the world. 6'3", his black wool coat falling to his knees, the collar raised against the wind. Silver watch catching light at his wrist. His eyes were the color of storm water, dark, penetrating, holding something that had learned to calculate violence the way other men calculated profit. 8 years of searching for a missing daughter had carved his face into stone, but there was no stone at all in his chest anymore. Only void. Only the sound of his own heartbeat that had learned to echo in empty rooms. Vinnie and Enzo flanked him, hands inside their coats, their presence like brackets around a sentence that was about to be spoken. They had followed Rafael Caruso through 15 years of business that was not business at all, through decisions that reorganized entire neighborhoods, through wars fought in silence. But they had never seen him move the way he moved now, not toward power, not toward retribution, but toward something broken that needed finding. The shelter director stammered when he walked through the doors. Her name was Margaret. She had been working there for 7 years, and she had learned to recognize danger the way a rabbit learns to recognize wolves. This was not danger with its fists bared. This was danger wearing a $1,000 coat and the eyes of a man who had learned to break the world silently. "I am looking for a child," Rafael said. His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Quiet like a blade wrapped in ice. 5 years old. Dark hair. "She answers to the name Ava." Margaret's mouth opened. Closed. She gestured down the hallway. The hallway was narrow, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed like dying insects. The smell of institutional soap and something warm, maybe cooking, maybe hope, hung in the air. Rafael moved forward, Vinnie and Enzo a step behind, and the world contracted around him until there was nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the certainty that in the next few seconds, everything would either end or be remade. Cassandra Bennett stepped into the hallway holding a small hand. Time stopped. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people describe moments that change them. Time actually stopped, the way it stops in the instant before a car crash, when all momentum suspends and the universe holds its breath. Ava was asleep against Cassandra's leg, her small face peaceful in a way that belonged only to children who had finally learned that hands could be gentle. Her dark hair fell across her cheek. She was wearing a borrowed shirt 3 sizes too large, tied at the waist with a strip of cloth. But it was Cassandra that made Rafael's entire body go rigid. She was small, maybe 5'2", maybe less, and she wore a diner uniform stained with coffee and the accumulated exhaustion of a double shift. Her hair was dark and pulled back severely, the way women who do not have time for their own lives pull it back. Her face was the kind of face that the world had tried its best to break, and it showed. It showed in the faint lines around her eyes, in the way she held her shoulders like she was waiting for a blow, in the careful emptiness she kept behind her gaze. But the scars. Jesus! The scars visible at her neckline where her uniform had shifted. They ran in every direction like a map of hell. Like someone had tried to mark every moment of her pain onto her skin in permanent ink. Rafael's gaze traveled across them, and something unmade and remade itself inside his chest in a single breath. Ava's eyes fluttered open. She saw him. "Papa," she cried, and the word shattered every careful thing he had built to survive the last 8 years without her. She pulled away from Cassandra's hand and stumbled forward, and Rafael dropped to his knees on the institutional tile floor, crushing her against his chest, his shoulders shaking with the kind of crying that belongs only to men who have spent so long not crying that the release of it becomes something close to violence. His face buried in her hair. His hands shaking as they held her small back. His body making sounds that his voice could not contain. Vinnie and Enzo exchanged a look that passed between them like electricity. In 15 years of working for Rafael Caruso, they had never seen their boss cry. They had seen him execute decisions that ended lives. They had seen him sit through family dinners discussing the architecture of destruction with the calm of a man discussing weather. But they had never seen him break like this, split open like fruit, his entire body remembering how to feel. Rafael looked up at Cassandra over Ava's head. His voice was broken, fractured like glass at the moment of impact. "You saved her," he said. "You protected her." Cassandra had gone very still. She was backing away slowly, one step at a time, her hands raised as if to say, "I am not responsible for this. I did not mean to crack open a man this powerful." "I did not know who she was," she said. Her voice was trembling like a candle in the wind. She needed someone. She was hungry. She was scared. I held her. That is all." Rafael stood slowly, Ava in his arms, the child's arms wrapped around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder. His eyes never left Cassandra's face. He looked at her the way a man looks at the answer to a prayer he did not know he had spoken. "What is your name?" he asked. "Cassandra," she said. "Cassandra Bennett." He repeated it like a prayer. Like an incantation. Like a word that had power over the dark. And what Cassandra did not know, what she could not have known as she stood in that narrow hallway under dying fluorescent lights with frost clinging to the windows outside, was that Rafael Caruso had spent 8 years hunting the brother who had betrayed him, who had sold his family to his enemies, who had caused his daughter to vanish from the world like smoke. He had spent 8 years building a file of crimes, a catalogue of suffering, a map of retribution. And in that moment, looking at the scars on this woman's neck, at the way her shoulders curved inward in the practiced posture of someone who had learned to make herself smaller, he understood something that changed the direction of his entire purpose. The hunt was not over. But it had a new target now. 3 blocks away, in an apartment that rented for $1,600 a month and was owned by a man who had not built anything in his life except suffering, Anthony Marchetti was pouring himself a glass of whiskey at 2 in the morning. He was thinking about Cassandra. He was always thinking about Cassandra. He was thinking about the $300,000 she owed him, about the 7 days she had left, about the way her face had looked when he told her what she could do to work off the debt. He took a long drink. The whiskey burned like satisfaction. He did not know that the clock had already started running on his own reckoning. 2 days later, at 1:45 on an afternoon when the December light was thin and merciless, Rafael Caruso sat behind a desk made of black marble in an office on the 40th floor of a glass building that overlooked San Francisco's harbor. The view showed the entire city, bridges, water, the distant mountains where the sky became uncertain. The view showed everything he owned. But he was not looking at it. Cassandra sat on the edge of a chair across from him, still in her diner uniform, still wearing orthopedic shoes on plush carpet that probably cost more per square foot than she made in a month. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her eyes were cast down. She was the kind of person who had learned to take up as little space as possible. Behind him, on a leather sofa the color of old blood, Ava slept with her thumb in her mouth and a small hand curled against her chest. Tell me how you found her, Rafael said. His voice was steady now, but there was something underneath it like current. Like the dangerous part of an ocean you cannot see from shore. Cassandra's voice came out barely above a whisper. The shelter. 3 weeks ago. It was a Tuesday night. She came into the kitchen looking for food. She had stolen a sandwich. She was so thin. So scared. I sat with her all night. I held her. By morning, she stopped shaking. Rafael's hands clenched on the desk. The veins rose at his temples, visible beneath his skin like a map of anger he was holding back. Why do you work at that diner? He asked. Why do you volunteer at a shelter when you can barely stand? I have had my men watch you. I have seen you work doubles. 16 hours sometimes. 18. You come home and you collapse on a bed that is not fit for an animal, and then you wake and do it again. Why? Cassandra's hands trembled in her lap. For a long moment, she did not answer. Then, slowly, she reached up and lifted her hair away from her neck. The scars seemed to multiply in the afternoon light. They ran in every direction, some like stripes, some like burns, some like the marks of a blade applied with precision and patience. They covered her neckline, disappeared beneath her uniform, a catalogue of injury that took years to create. My ex-husband, Cassandra said. His name is Anthony Marchetti. For 8 years, he did this. In small ways. In places no one could see. He said it was because he loved me. He said it was because I made him do it. He said I should be grateful it was his hands and not someone else's. She dropped her hair. The scars disappeared beneath it, but they did not disappear from Rafael's mind. I left him 3 years ago, Cassandra continued. But he owns the building I live in. He bought it somehow, or I do not know how. And now he says I owe him $300,000. He says I must pay it in 7 days or he will evict me. I have $200 left to my name. That is all. 200. That is everything I have in this world. Vinnie, standing by the door with Enzo, exchanged a look. In 15 years, they had never seen their boss's hands shake like this. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscle worked beneath his skin. Rafael's voice dropped to a whisper. It was worse than if he had shouted. Where is he? Rafael asked. I do not know, Cassandra said. But he will find me. He always finds me. That same evening, Anthony Marchetti appeared at the shelter. He was mid-40s, with thinning hair that he tried to hide by keeping it longer than it suited him. He wore a cheap suit that had cost $200 and carried himself like it cost $2,000. His smile, when he found Cassandra in the kitchen, was the smile of a man who enjoyed power over the powerless. It was the smile of someone who had discovered that cruelty was the easiest currency. Cassie, he said, and the way he said her name was itself a threat. A degradation. A claim of ownership. She was holding a potato, halfway to the cutting board. Her knife froze. Anthony moved fast. He grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to cut off circulation, his breath hot on her face. It smelled like cigarettes and cheap liquor and the satisfaction of a man who had found what he was looking for. You think volunteering with orphans makes you special? His voice was low, meant only for her. You think this makes you good? You owe me $300,000, Cassie. 7 days. Or you are sleeping in the street. On the pavement. In the rain. Do you understand me? She did not answer. Answering made things worse. He twisted her wrist. She felt the joint shift, felt the edge of real injury beneath the pain. Her other hand gripped the knife tighter, and for one clear moment, she imagined driving it into his ribs. She imagined it clearly, the resistance, the give, the sudden silence that would follow. But she had seen what happened to women who hurt men like Anthony Marchetti. She had read the news reports. She had learned to fold her rage very carefully and put it away in a place inside her chest where it could not escape. "Unless you want to work it off another way," he said, and his hand moved lower on her body, and his meaning became clear and vile and unmistakable. Cassandra pulled away. She ran. 2 days later, the courthouse hallway was full of people waiting for their hearings. The light came through tall windows and fell in yellow rectangles across the marble floor. Cassandra was waiting for her turn, her diner uniform exchanged for clothes that were slightly less threadbare, her hands folded to hide the trembling. Sophie Langford made her entrance the way people do when they have been told their entire lives that space bent around them. Early 30s, blonde hair twisted into something severe and expensive, a designer suit in pale grey that probably cost more than Cassandra's monthly rent. Her perfume arrived first, something that smelled like jasmine and money. She was Anthony's ex-lover and current business partner. She had also, apparently, decided that Cassandra was her new target. "There she is," Sophie said loudly. Her voice carried across the hallway. People turned and stared. The thief. The little waitress who thinks she can steal children and play hero. She turned to the crowd, and her smile was the smile of someone who had never experienced consequences, who believed that beauty and money were armor against accountability. "This woman kidnapped a child from a wealthy family," Sophie announced. "She is a criminal. I have already contacted every employer in this city. Every restaurant, every hotel, every business. No one will hire you, Cassandra. You are finished. You are done. The world knows what you are now." A security guard approached. Sophie smiled at him like they were conspirators. Like she had just handed him a gift. Cassandra stood frozen. Around her, the marble hallway seemed to echo with the sound of every door closing at once. She could feel her name being erased. She could feel her future being written out of existence. A man in a grey suit was watching her from across the hallway. She did not notice him. That evening, Rafael appeared at the diner during her shift. He slid into a booth in the corner, ordered nothing, waited. When Cassandra took her break at 9:37, she found him waiting. The sight of him in this place, his coat probably worth more than the diner's monthly lease, his silver watch catching the fluorescent light, his eyes like storm water in a room that smelled like grease and despair, made the entire booth seem to shift. "Sit," he said. It was not a request. She sat across from him, her hand shaking on the formica table. "Why would you help me?" she asked. The question came out broken. "I am nobody. I am a waitress. I am a woman with nothing. I have $200. That is my entire life." Rafael reached across the table. He stopped just short of touching her hand, but the absence of contact was itself a touch. "A promise. A guarantee. You are the woman who saved my daughter when you had nothing," he said. His voice was steady, absolute, like an oath. "You are everything." But what Cassandra did not know was that in the back office of an insurance building 3 blocks away, Vinnie was compiling a file on Anthony Marchetti. Every crime. Every victim. Every secret. The financial crimes. The violence. The way he had bought the building with money that had come from places that did not officially exist. The reckoning was not just coming. It was already here. The clear winter night stretched above San Francisco like a canvas painted with stars, each one sharp and cold and impossibly distant. Frost clung to every surface, the metal railing of the shelter's back stairs, the concrete steps, the strands of Cassandra's hair where her breath had frozen into tiny crystals. The city below glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and indifferent, the kind of beauty that existed whether you lived or died. Cassandra Bennett stood at the edge of those stairs at 2:18 in the morning, her entire body shaking. Not from the cold. From something deeper. Something that had hollowed her out completely. That afternoon, Anthony had changed the locks. All of it, the furniture she had paid for in increments, the clothes hanging in the closet, the toothbrush she had owned for 3 years, all of it was now on the curb outside the building. A life piled on concrete like garbage. She had retrieved a cardboard box. She had filled it with what she could carry. 2 sweaters. 3 pairs of socks. A pair of shoes without holes. A photograph in a cracked frame. In that frame, her husband. Michael. Dead for 4 years. Dead before she had ever met Anthony. Dead before everything broke. She pulled the photograph from her pocket now. Even in the darkness, she could see his face. The way he smiled. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. $200 remained in her other pocket. $200. That was her entire life now. The railing was cold beneath her palms. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped it. The edge of the stairs dropped away into shadow. How easy it would be to simply not turn around. To simply keep walking forward into that darkness. No more shifts. No more Anthony's voice in her ear. No more Sophie spreading lies through the courthouse like poison through water. No more impossible numbers. No more. Just nothing. She could disappear. One waitress gone from the world. How many people would notice? How many would care? The shelter had 50 beds. Tomorrow night another woman would take her place. The diner would find another waitress. Michael's photograph would disappear. That would be the only loss that mattered, and eventually even that would fade. Her hand loosened on the railing. Then from inside the shelter, a child's voice pierced the silence. Not Ava. A different child. A girl maybe 6 years old, screaming from a nightmare, her voice raw and fractured with terror. Cassandra's eyes snapped open. She stood there, fingers still touching cold metal, listening to that small sound tear through the building. The child was crying now, the nightmare still holding her, that terrible place between sleep and waking where monsters were real and no one was coming. Cassandra turned. She turned away from the railing and walked back toward the door. Her hands were still shaking as she pulled it open. The warmth inside hit her like a slap. She moved through the hallway, her wet shoes making prints on linoleum, following that child's voice to the dormitory. The girl was sitting up in her cot, tears streaming down her small face, her mouth open but no sound coming now. Just the memory of the scream. Cassandra sat on the edge of the bed. She did not speak. She simply held the child against her chest and let her shake. The girl's name was Emma. She was 6. She had been living in the shelter for 8 months. Her mother was in rehab. Her father had never been in the picture. It was not real, Cassandra whispered. You are safe. The nightmare is gone. It was so real, Emma said. Her voice was small and broken. Everything was dark and I could not breathe and you were gone and I was alone. Cassandra held her tighter. She thought about that moment on the stairs. She thought about how close she had come to making that child's nightmare real. I am here, she said. I am not going anywhere. The lie tasted like copper. But Emma's breathing slowed. Her small body relaxed against Cassandra's chest. Within minutes, she was asleep again, safe in the myth of protection that Cassandra had offered. Cassandra sat with her until dawn. Across the city, 3 blocks away, in a building that housed insurance agencies and tax accountants and lawyers in grey suits, Vinnie was finishing his work. The file in front of him was comprehensive. Meticulous. Every crime Anthony Marchetti had ever committed, documented. Every victim. Every scar he had left behind. The financial crimes were flagrant. The property he owned, including the building Cassandra lived in, had been purchased with money that had come from places that did not officially exist. From extortion. From protection rackets. From women like Cassandra who had nowhere else to go. Vinnie added the final document to the file. A photograph of bruises. A copy of a foreclosure notice. A record of threats made over 8 years. He sealed the envelope. He placed it on Rafael's desk. He did not need to speak. Rafael would understand. That same night, in an apartment on the northern edge of the city, Anthony Marchetti sat at his kitchen table counting cash. Stacks of bills arranged in precise rows. Money from the eviction threats. Money from the women who had paid rather than lose their homes. Money from Sophie's little arrangements. She had handled the social destruction while he handled the financial extraction. A perfect partnership? His phone rang. Sophie's voice came through, rapid and excited. "It worked," she said. "Cassandra's name is completely destroyed. I made sure of it. Every charity board, every decent employer, every person who might have helped her, they all know the lies now. I told the courthouse staff that she stole from Anthony. I told them she was unstable. I told them she tried to seduce you, and when you rejected her, she fabricated the abuse claims." The judge heard every word. Anthony laughed. The sound filled the apartment like smoke. "The 300,000 is never coming," Sophie continued. "She has nothing. She is nothing. By next week, she will be too broken to even fight back. She will sign whatever papers you want. She will disappear." "Perfect," Anthony said. He was still counting money when the door opened. He did not hear it open. That was the first sign that something had changed. 12 men in black moved into the apartment like water flowing into a space, filling every corner simultaneously. They moved without speaking. Their precision was absolute. Tactical. Military. Anthony's head snapped up. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. His hand instinctively moved toward the gun beneath the table, but Vinnie was already there, already pointing a weapon directly at his chest. "Do not move," Vinnie said. His voice was quiet. Conversational. Which somehow made it worse. The men surrounded the table. Anthony's face drained of all color. His lips moved soundlessly. Then Rafael Caruso walked through the door. He moved slowly, deliberately, his presence filling the apartment like flood water, displacing everything that had occupied that space before. His coat was charcoal gray, cashmere worth more than Anthony had made in his entire life. His eyes were storm water. His scar caught the light, from eye to cheekbone, a permanent reminder of a debt paid long ago. "Who are you?" Anthony's voice cracked. It came out high and thin and desperate. "What do you want?" Rafael did not answer immediately. He simply walked to the table and looked down at the stacks of cash. He looked at Anthony's face. He looked at the apartment with its cheap furniture and cheaper art. "You put your hands on Cassandra Bennett," Rafael said finally. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. "For 8 years. You bruised her ribs. You scarred her spine. You threatened to evict her unless she paid $300,000 in 7 days. A number so impossible that it existed only as a weapon." Anthony's entire body began to tremble. "I did not know," he gasped. "I swear to God, I did not know she was connected to you. I swear. She is nobody. She is just a waitress. Please. I will disappear. I will forgive the debt. I will leave the city tonight. Please." Rafael nodded to Vinnie. What happened next happened very quickly and then very slowly. Anthony was lifted from his chair. His screams began, high and fractured, the sound of a man watching his own ending arrive. His legs kicked. His hands clawed at the air. His voice broke as Vinnie and Enzo carried him toward the door. "No, no, no, please, I am begging you. Please." The door closed. His screams continued for another few seconds. Then they stopped. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a clock on the wall. The stacks of cash remained on the table, untouched. Vinnie stood motionless, watching the door where Anthony had been dragged into the hallway, into the black van waiting with its engine running. Anthony Marchetti would be handed over to a rival family. His fate would be worse than death. Death would be merciful. Death would be quick. This would be neither. He would never surface again. He would become what he had made Cassandra into, invisible, erased, a ghost of a person that the living world had decided to forget. The next morning arrived grey and cold. FBI agents in dark jackets moved through Sophie Langford's office building at 6:45 a.m., before the staff arrived, before she could destroy evidence or call lawyers. Sophie was in her private office, reviewing social media posts about Cassandra's destruction, sipping champagne from a crystal flute, when the agents entered without knocking. The champagne flute fell to the marble floor and shattered. Sophie Langford, the lead agent, asked, though they both knew the answer. "What is this?" Sophie's voice was sharp. "You cannot simply enter my office. I have rights. I am calling my lawyer." "You can call from the holding cell," the agent said. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, blackmail, and racketeering. You are connected to Anthony Marchetti's illegal real estate schemes. Every email, every text, every transaction between you and him has been documented." They did not tell her that Rafael Caruso had ensured every file was given to every federal agency. They did not tell her that his influence ran so deep that her arrest was already being photographed, already being filmed, already being spread across news outlets that would run her image beside words like fraud and conspiracy and ruthless. She was arrested in front of her employees. Her perfect hair was disheveled. Her face twisted with rage and terror and disbelief. She screamed about lawyers as they led her out, her hands cuffed, cameras flashing. By that afternoon, her assets were frozen. By that evening, every charitable board she served on had officially disassociated from her. By the next morning, her name was synonymous with scandal. Justice was not death. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice was 40 years in federal prison. Justice was her wealth obliterated. Justice was her power unmade. Justice was living long enough to watch everything she had built collapse, watching the same women she had humiliated now humiliate her, watching her name become the thing she had tried to make Cassandra's name become, a synonym for ruin. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up. 1 year later, the November wind carried the scent of eucalyptus and salt water across the San Francisco skyline. Cassandra Bennett stood on a penthouse balcony 42 stories above the city, her black dress moving like water against her skin, her hair falling past her shoulders in waves she had learned to let live untamed. The woman reflected in the glass door behind her was someone she almost recognized, someone with color in her cheeks, with light in her eyes that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with becoming. The House of Hope had opened 3 months ago in the Mission District. Cassandra had spent the year pouring herself into its foundation, one survivor at a time, one safe room at a time, one person learning that the world could hold gentleness alongside its cruelty. Rafael had funded it completely, had signed the deed without asking for anything in return, and then had stepped back, giving her the space to stand in her own strength without his shadow covering the ground beneath her feet. 8 months of silence between them. 8 months where she rebuilt the architecture of her own life, where she learned that healing was not a destination but a direction, where she discovered that the scars on her spine no longer felt like a map of hell but like evidence that she had survived. She held a glass of wine to her lips, tasting the cold burn of it, watching the city lights scatter like fallen stars across the darkness below. The Christmas lights in the distance blinked in patterns she had learned to love instead of mourn. The fog rolled in from the bay, soft and deliberate, wrapping the buildings in a mercy she understood now. Footsteps crossed the threshold behind her. Deliberate. Measured. She knew the weight of them before she turned, knew the presence that bent light the way he always had, but something was different in the way he carried himself now, less like a man commanding the world and more like a man simply walking toward what mattered. "You found me," Cassandra said, still facing the lights, her voice steady like water that has finally learned its own depth. Rafael Caruso stopped beside her at the railing. His suit was charcoal gray, his shirt open at the collar to reveal the hollow at the base of his throat, and his eyes, those storm-dark eyes that had terrified half of San Francisco, held something that looked like prayer. "I have always known where you were," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I wanted to give you time." "Time for what?" She turned to him finally, and the city lights caught in her irises like reflections of 1,000 small flames. Raphael's jaw tightened. "Time to become who you were always meant to be." Not the woman I saved. Not the woman I owed. The woman who protected Ava when she had nothing, when the world had taken everything. His hand moved to cover hers on the railing, his skin warm, his touch gentle like a man learning how to hold something precious without crushing it. I fell in love with you the moment I saw you holding her. Every day since has only made it worse. Cassandra's breath caught between her ribs like a bird caught in a cage of bone. Her hand turned beneath his, fingers intertwining, and tears, real tears, earned tears, the kind that come from healing instead of breaking, moved down her face. I am not broken anymore, she whispered. You never were, Rafael said. You were just waiting to remember your own strength. He kissed her under stars sharp as diamonds, his hands moving to her face like she was made of something sacred. Below them, San Francisco sprawled in its infinite complexity, the neighborhoods where they had both suffered, the streets that had tried to bury them, the city that had become witness to their becoming. The frost on the balcony railing caught the moonlight and transformed it into something luminous. 2 blocks away, parked in the underground garage, Vinnie and Enzo sat watching the security feed on a phone screen. Vinnie was smiling for the first time in months, a real smile that reached his eyes. About damn time, Enzo muttered, shaking his head. I thought we were going to have to stage an intervention. The 2 men exchanged a look that said everything. In 15 years of working for Rafael Caruso, they had never seen him like this. They had never seen him vulnerable. They had never seen him choose love over empire, choose one woman over the machinery of his entire operation. And yet here he was, holding her like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows. 3 months after that night, the San Francisco Chronicle ran a story about the House of Hope's expansion. 2 new shelters opened on the same day, one in the Tenderloin, one in the Outer Mission. Both funded entirely by legitimate charitable enterprises, both staffed by survivors who had learned that the word broken was just the world's way of saying not yet healed. Cassandra stood at the ribbon cutting, her hand steady as she held the scissors. Rafael stood beside her, and Ava, who had asked to be called Ava Caruso now, who had learned that a name could be a choice and not a curse, held their hands. Cameras flashed. The community cheered. Local news ran the segment on the evening broadcast, from abuse survivor to hope builder, the woman changing San Francisco one shelter at a time. They did not know her full story. They did not need to. Her work spoke for itself. That same week, Cassandra visited the old diner where she had counted coins at 3 in the morning, where Carl the manager had let her eat the unsold pie at closing time, where she had learned the particular loneliness of being invisible. She left a $5,000 donation in his name. When he called her crying, she told him simply, "You showed me kindness when you had no obligation to." I will never forget that. Rafael's transformation was quieter but no less complete. The black SUVs and the men in suits became the architecture of legitimate business. His real estate empire went legal, every building inspected, every tenant protected. He founded the Cassandra Bennett Foundation, which provided legal aid to abuse survivors and funded shelters across 3 states. The ruthless boss who had once ordered the disappearance of his enemies now found himself ordering playgrounds built, therapy programs funded, childcare centers opened. Ava learned to call him Papa without fear. She learned that his hands, which had once held the weight of an empire's darkness, could also braid her hair and read bedtime stories and hold her when she had nightmares. He learned her favorite color was blue. He learned she loved the smell of rain. He learned that being a father required more courage than being a crime lord ever had. 2 months before Christmas, Rafael got down on one knee on that same balcony. The diamond he offered was not particularly large, but it caught the light and transformed it into something infinite. "Will you marry me?" he asked, and his voice was steady, and his eyes were clear, and for the first time in his life he was not asking as a man accustomed to obedience but as a man hoping for grace. "Yes," Cassandra said, and it was the easiest word she had ever spoken. They married in March, in a chapel decorated with white flowers and morning light. The guest list was small, Vinnie and Enzo and the other men who had learned to follow a different kind of leader. Survivors from the House of Hope. Carl from the diner. 200 people who had experienced her kindness. The ceremony was simple. The vows were real. In the photographs from that day, you can see it clearly, Cassandra's face holding a joy so complete it looks almost like a prayer answered. You can see Rafael looking at her like she is the only person in the room, the only person in the world, the only person worth building an empire for or dismantling one for. You can see Ava between them, grinning so wide her whole face is light. That night, as they danced in a ballroom with the city sprawling below them, Cassandra whispered something to him that only he could hear. I spent 8 years believing I was powerless. But the truth is, strength was never about fighting back alone. It was about surviving long enough to find people who would stand with you. About protecting one child even when you had nothing. About choosing to stay when the world told you to disappear. The empty lot where Anthony's building once stood had been transformed. The condemned structure was torn down, its rubble removed, and in its place, Rafael built affordable housing. 30 units for families who were exactly where Cassandra had been, one catastrophe away from the street, one disaster away from invisibility. The ribbon cutting was attended by the mayor. Cassandra cut it alongside Rafael, and the community that gathered held signs that said, "Housing is a right and hope lives here." Sophie Langford's sentencing came down in November. 40 years federal prison. No parole. Her assets were liquidated and redirected to victim compensation funds. Every board she had ever served on erased her name from their records like she had never existed. The woman who had made it her life's work to ensure Cassandra's invisibility now understood, perhaps too late, what invisibility truly felt like. But that story barely registered anymore. It was over. Justice had been served in 1,000 small ways, and the important work was happening in the places where Cassandra built shelter, created safety, taught other women that survival was only the beginning, that becoming was still possible, that life could be reconstructed, that the word broken was never the end of the sentence. Cassandra stood in front of the camera now, on the steps of the House of Hope, with Rafael's hand on her shoulder and Ava smiling beside them. The late afternoon light caught in her hair. Her voice was clear, steady, full of a strength that had been forged in the hottest fires of living. I spent 8 years believing I was powerless. But the truth is, strength was never about fighting back alone. It was about surviving long enough to find people who would stand with you. About protecting one child even when you had nothing. About choosing to stay when the world told you to disappear. Real strength is not found in never falling but in always standing back up. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because tomorrow we have another story that will shake you just as hard. Comment below, what would you have done in Cassandra's position? Your engagement keeps these stories alive. We will see you in the next one.